Abraham, principal of Catholicate College, and principals of other colleges who may have joined, students and teachers who are gathered here today, and it is really commendable that a collaborative effort is being made to take forward a national level webinar, where you also have, I think, I must have left it out, there was a college that is there in Delhi also, which is a part of this national webinar. Firstly, let me thank Dr. Binoy Thomas, who has been in constant touch with me to invite me to this webinar. And as rightly mentioned by the Pro Vice Chancellor, it is very essential that educators understand the nuances of this new national education policy and feel invested to carry forward the reforms. Any policy, I think all of us who are here today will understand, will only be analyzed at the end of the benefits that it has accrued when it is implemented in its letter and spirit. And we all know from the past experiences that we've had very good policies, not just in education, but in several other sectors. But those policies, unless they are implemented in the true spirit, may not really achieve or reap the benefits of that particular recommendation. Now, what I would try to do in this hour or 1 hour or so, because we would like to have some time for interaction, is I'll just sort of situate the national education policy in terms of the rationale for which we brought out a national education policy. Thereafter, go on to speak about some of the cardinal principles that outline this policy, the recommendations, particularly in the field of higher education. To some extent, will require me to cover a few from the school education because of the continuum within which this policy has been formulated. And then on the stage of implementation that this policy is currently in, and how as higher education institutions, which are autonomous bodies, can go about trying to implement many of the academic reforms really without waiting for clear directions or regulations and so on. So just to put it in the context, while we say that this is the third policy of independent India as far as education is concerned, there have been numerous reports that have come out which cover different verticals of education. But as far as policies are concerned, I think the entire group here would know. The first one was in 1968, which is the outcome of the very voluminous D.S. Kothari Committee report, followed by the 86 policy, which was partially modified in 1992 along with a program of action. And this current one, which is the first in the 21st century. And to also sort of put in context the rationale, a policy is not brought about because of the fact that the previous policy had any lacunae or had certain inconsistencies. Policies are brought out as a response to the changes that happen within the society, within the economy, and within the world. And in this particular case, since the last policy to the present times, which has about a gap of more than 3 decades, I think all of us sitting here would agree that there have been several changes that have taken place. When one has been the advent of the information and communication technologies, which has made us a very globally connected society. The immediate changes are the ones that have come about with the disruptive technologies of artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, robotics, virtual reality, augmented reality, and so on. The other is the fact that we have moved from an information-based society to a knowledge-based society, or a knowledge economy, as we are looking at. And all state development reports, including the one of our own state, Kerala, would look at how we can transform ourselves to become a knowledge economy. And what does that mean? It means that the human capital, the people power that we have, should become productive individuals to be able to convert whatever potential they have for their individual benefits, for the societal benefit, for the national development, and to become globally a very relevant citizen. So in this context, it is very important that the main catalytic tool to bring about this transformation, which is education, should embed or sort of develop the right kind of knowledge, skills, and capabilities in our students. And this is precisely what the National Education Policy 2020 is attempting through its various recommendations. The Indian scenario has other demands which call for a new national education policy. The demands come from 2 or 3 parameters, some which are intrinsically related to the characteristic of learning and the characteristic of knowledge itself. The others which are related to the global commitment that we are committed to as a nation within the United Nations and the Sustainable Development Goals. And the third is something that is inherently indigenous to us, and that is the youth power that we have. Now, let me try to put this. As a country, we are committed to the global goals of sustainable development, which are about 17 in number, ranging from education and health and poverty and urban development and clean energy and so on, relating to people, planet, and partnerships. These are the 3 Ps that it is trying to, and to achieve most of these goals by 2030. And the SDG goal 4 is to ensure inclusive and quality equitable education for all with lifelong learning opportunities. So obviously an education policy should be able to be inclusive. It should be able to promote equity and reduce the differences which was highlighted by the Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor, and also cover upon aspects relating to enhancing quality so that we create a sustainable society, which requires for providing lifelong learning opportunities. I hope there is clarity in the audio.
Yes, you are audible now.
Yeah. No, is there any time slack or something like that?
No issue, madam.
No issue.
You can,
Okay.
you can continue.
Yeah. Thank you. Now, this goal of achieving SDG 4 is something that as a nation we need to strive, so that in the Global Committee of Nations, we are also contributing to creating an equitable society. We are no longer in a situation where what happens in one country insulates us from other countries. It's all so connected that we need to work towards it as a common goal as nations coming together. The other is the aspect that India is blessed with a very substantially high proportion of youth population, what we are calling the demographic dividend. Now, it will be a demographic dividend only if that youth population is sort of well equipped and well endowed, well employed, having the right kind of skills and capabilities. A youth population which is unemployed, which is underemployed, which is not able to channel the productive energies and go into other ways which might be harmful, is something that can threaten the very fabric of this country, not only socially, but economically, and in many other ways, which will result in making a strife-driven society. And therefore, in order to harness the youth power that we have, what is the only way in which we can do that is empower them with the right kind of education that instills in them the right kind of knowledge, the right kind of skills, the right kind of attitudes, the right kind of capabilities, and look at each individual from their own potential rather than treating all individual students as an en masse group of students. On that point, I'll come to a little later. Now, the 2 other dimensions which are which are the very rationale for looking at the recommendations of NEP 2020 is the fact that learning as an activity per se is not seen as a unidimensional activity. Learning, as has been rightly pointed out in the Delors Commission report of UNESCO for learning in the 21st century, the title of that report is very interesting. Learning the treasure within. That means learning is something that is intrinsic to each one of us. And therefore, if it is intrinsic to each one of us, it is unique because every individual is a unique creation with different potentials and talents and aspirations and capabilities. So if you have an education system which is rigid and which is so structured and not flexible to accommodate individual needs and not customized to that, you will not necessarily give them the right kind of knowledge and skills. So the 4 pillars of learning, as told in the Delors Commission report, learning to know, which is the cognitive part of it, the knowledge dimension of it, learning to do, which is the skills, the practicum, the experiential part of it, learning to live together and to live with others, which is the aspect of compassion and peaceful societies and sustainable living, and finally learning to be, which is the title of that report, learning the treasure within, which is the individual's potentials being maximized through an education system. So the learning, the treasure within is basically learning to be oneself in the best manner possible, the flowering of every individual potential that has to be done through the vehicle of the education system. And that is you and me as faculty, as administrators, as leaders, the human element of the education system. Knowledge itself on the other dimension, learning as an aspect and knowledge as an aspect. Knowledge itself, as has been told by Professor Yashpal in his report in the early 90s, clearly says that knowledge is porous and knowledge draws from other disciplines. And therefore, the disciplinary boundaries that we have of physics and chemistry and botany and mechanical engineering and agriculture and pharmacy, nursing, so on, these are all drawing from one another. And therefore, the multidimensionality of knowledge, the porosity of knowledge moves us towards multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, cross-disciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, and so on. So both these dimensions, coupled with our global commitment, calls for these kind of changes, and the advent and almost the revolution that has happened, that we have moved from an information-based society to a knowledge-based society, is where we need to understand the NEP 2020. And the 5 goals of National Education Policy 2020 are that of access, equity, quality, affordability, and accountability. And all the recommendations that have been there, where education system is seen as one single continuum, starting from the early childhood care and education into this, which is a part of the school education, to higher education, looking at technical and professional education, adult education, vocational education, teacher education. All these have been seen with, the continuity that it has and embedding within which relationships that are formed and cross-cutting themes, research in education, science and technology in education, technological interventions in education. All these are seen as the cross-cutting themes, including adult education. We have looked at adult education, vocational education, and so on. So the entire spectrum of education has been covered in the committee's report, which is a very voluminous document of about 484 pages, and in a crisp document of 66 pages. And I think as an exercise that we did for bringing out the policy, it stretched over 5.5 year long deliberations across multiple stakeholders, offline, online, thematic, and expert groups, 2 or 3 committees that were there, and finally the committee of Dr. Kasturarangan, of which I was the secretary, report being accepted by the government, to become the base for which the policy has been brought out. Now, coming to the fundamental changes that are taking place in higher education. One is the current system that we have of a very structured, disciplinary, single silo-based disciplinary education system is sought to be transformed by bringing about what we call a very flexible, integrated, holistic, multidisciplinary undergraduate program, which can be of 3 years or 4 years. That's the first major change. The second is in the structure of higher education. India can boast of having one of the largest higher education systems in the world, with over 1,000 plus universities, about 40,000 affiliated colleges, about 17 to 18,000 standalone institutions, which vary in its character in many ways. Character in terms of the governance, some are centrally funded, some are state funded, some are treated as private institutions, are deemed universities, some are unitary universities, some are affiliating universities. All these are the various categories and characteristics of the institutions. And we have tried to only say that let us define higher education systems by the functionality that it seeks to perform, whether they are teaching intensive or research intensive. And the third tier that we are talking about is moving away from the affiliation system on which the Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor raised some concerns to becoming what we call degree granting autonomous colleges. And the other changes that relate to students in terms of allowing optimal learning environments, having more freedom and autonomy being given to faculty so that they can innovate and they can bring about what we call the better learning environments where students are able to flourish through their various potentials and capabilities. So let me now come to the rationale why we bring about this kind of multidisciplinarity. I'll urge each one of you, even if you have read that document earlier, to go through the first chapter where we talk about 22 cardinal principles underlying the recommendations of this policy. And the very first principle is the most critical one, where it says that an education system should be able to identify, recognize, and nurture the unique potential of every child and promote his or her holistic development. It is this word, this single principle, which moves away from a cliche that we tend to use when we say it's learner-centric, to actually become learner-centric, because every learner is unique in terms of their talents and their potentials. If you look at that, a class of 30 or a class of 60 or a class of 100, whatever that number may be, a teacher is challenged by the fact that not only there is a heterogeneity in the social composition and the economic composition of this group, but the teacher is also challenged by the fact that every child needs individual attention. And that is where exactly the NEP 2020 is making out a strong case for flexibility in curricular approaches, in pedagogical approaches, in methods of assessment, in language policies, so that we allow every child to harness his or her potential rather than categorizing students as being excellent or being a failure altogether. Allowing that range, allowing that spectrum to actually function as each individual student's capability. And it is this principle that has resulted in all our recommendations of using mother tongue in school education, to moving away from the current structured schooling system to a 5+3+3+4, which is not a physical restructuring of schools, but only a curricular and pedagogical restructuring. And in the middle stage, which is from class 6 onwards, moving away from the hard separations that we have of curricular subjects, co-curricular subjects, extracurricular subjects, vocational subjects, academic subjects, arts, science, commerce, and so on. It is this change that is going to flow into the higher education. And already the CBSE has started doing that in the schools that run like Kendriya Vidyalayas and others which are affiliated to the Central Board for Secondary Education, and hopefully state boards, because you must understand, for a national education policy, it is a subject within the concurrent list. While implementing the policy, the primacy of the state governments in trying to, as we need to understand, their preparedness to carry out these reforms have to be taken on board. So as a matter within the concurrent list, and keeping the spirit of cooperative federalism without being overbearing from a national or a central point of view, but taking into account the interest of the primary stakeholders, mainly the students, the teachers, and the educational institutions, we should be able to implement a policy. So what CBSE is doing may gradually be adopted by the states. We see the merits in trying to implement a policy. But any policy in a country like ours, which is so diverse, has to account for a national level footprint, without which students in one part of the region may stand to lose out on the major reforms that may be taking place. And that is precisely where I was quite happy to hear that just like the NEP 2020 talks about 4 new curricula, a national curricula for early childhood care and education, a national curriculum framework for school education, a national curriculum framework for teacher education, and a national curriculum framework for adult education. About 3 or 2 weeks back, the Honorable Education Minister of our state announced that they will also be working out on the state level curriculum on these lines. So this fact, the recognition that what the national education policy is actually saying that we need to reform these curricula to meet the changing needs is acceptable in principle, and therefore the state government is also taking initiatives to move in that direction. Now, as far as higher education is concerned, since all of you are autonomous institutions and are free to carry out reforms, you are only looking at the UGC or the AICTE or the National Council for Teacher Education or the particular regulatory bodies in terms of trying to carry out the reforms. So let's not worry about that. Let that take place as it is. Let us just try and understand what are those changes that we have to do in higher education. Now, the most important one is the undergraduate program, which is 3 years or 4 years undergraduate multidisciplinary integrated program. Currently, I understand in this particular webinar also, we have 4 institutions and all of you all are offering, I think, arts and science. When we say you have to become multidisciplinary, we would mean that students who are joining can take up subjects in commerce, can take up in management, can take up in engineering, can take up music, can take up pharmacy. Now the question would be, when you are not an institution offering it, how is it possible that how is it possible for you to offer it as a multidisciplinary program? Of course, we do expect that all institutions gradually will start moving to becoming multidisciplinary. Our deadline, of course, in the policy we have said is 2030, but in the social sector, you cannot really lay down timetables with a very rigid time frame. Even when we say 2030, we are also aware that it can be plus or minus additional 2 years or so. Now, even though the policy was approved on 29th of July 2020, we are speaking almost 2 years into the policy getting approved. And we know that as of now, many things are yet to take off on ground. A substantial amount has started taking place as far as school education, but in higher education, while UGC has brought out a number of guidelines, it is yet to start announcing the 3-year or 4-year program because of the time that may be taken, the gestation period that we would all require to start offering multidisciplinary programs. But now let me come to this particular aspect. So if you are an arts and science commerce college and you need to allow students to take up multidisciplinary courses where the student can take up music or play or a sport like cricket or learn a language like maybe Urdu or Sanskrit or Persian or Tamil or Malayalam or whatever language, or let us say a vocational subject like carpentry or maybe plumbing or maybe retail management or maybe blockchain and supply chain management, all this, how is it possible for any one of your institutions to do that? While we are aware that it may take quite some time, maybe 10 years or 12 years for each institution to become multidisciplinary, meanwhile, we are wanting higher education institutions to form higher education clusters. Clusters is a conglomeration of institutions coming together, signing an academic MOU or arrangement, allowing students to take up courses offered in other institutions in and around within a geographical vicinity. So if you have engineering colleges there, or medical colleges there, or language universities, or performing arts, or sports academies, or agriculture universities, we enter into an arrangement with them as an HEI cluster to allow students joining, let us say, Catholicate College, Pathanamthitta, to take up agriculture from another college, to take up music from another college, to take up a language from another college, take up mechanical engineering from another college, or learning, let us say, forensic science from a medical college, all this as part of the HEI cluster. Now, we have also said that if there are courses that a student wants, which is not available in the physical face-to-face form of learning, then the student can take it up from open universities. So we now have in Kerala also Sri Narayana Guru National State Level Open University, or can take it up from IGNOU as a National Open University, or it can even take, the student can even take a Swayam course, which is what we call a MOOCs course, available on the platform of Swayam, led by the Ministry of Education. But we are not allowing them to take Coursera or edX or Udacity or any, which are the other private platforms that may be there. That is not flexible, or that is not allowed as far as the policy is concerned. We may do so in future, but we don't want to get this very strong criticism that we are allowing private edtech companies to come into the play. Now, this is now possible for a student to take up, let us say, sociology, because it is offered in Catholicate College or Baselius College or KG College and so on, and take up environmental science, which is offered in some other institution, and take up pharmacy, which is offered somewhere else, or agriculture that is offered somewhere else, and allow these credits to be accumulated through an instrumentality that we have devised called the Academic Bank of Credit. So I would urge at this stage that maybe I can share it with Professor Binoy for your consumption after the webinar is over, the guidelines of the University Grants Commission related to the Academic Bank of Credit. But meanwhile, have a look at the website of the abc.gov.in. The abc.gov.in has two levels of, let us say, loading yourselves onto that portal. One is for the student through the other linkage that it has with a DigiLocker, and for the institutions to onboard themselves to become a part of the Academic Bank of Credit. Now, what is an Academic Bank of Credit? Just as you have a bank account, which you are digitally operating today through your mobile apps or through internet banking, the same way a digital storage of academic credits earned by a student, and why it is digitally stored and why that is very essential to have it digitally stored, is arising from the fact that I take admission into Catholicate College, but I acquire credits not just from courses offered in Catholicate College, but also from, let us say, another college under the MG University, or from an open and distance learning, or from a college which is affiliated to Kerala Agriculture University, or from any other college. it doesn't matter where that institution is affiliated to. When you allow that kind of flexibility to the student to register for courses offered not just by his college or his university, then you need to store that not in a physical form, but in a digital form. And when the student, if the student is continuing in the same institution also, but acquiring credits from multiple ways of learning, maybe open and distance learning, MOOCs, and so on, plus other institutions, this digital storage allows that student to retrieve those credits and also see the credits gained by him or her at any point, at any time. And so also for a prospective employer who, after the student has completed the graduation, can also retrieve that to know that there has been no fudging of a physical document or a forged certificate or a fake certificate. Now, this is a revolutionary change. And without this instrumentality, we cannot really implement what we call multidisciplinary education or ensure that HEI clusters and so on offer effective undergraduate programs. Now, this is one part of the flexibility in choosing courses. The second we have given is flexibility in taking courses, not from the institution where he or she has just taken admission, but from other institutions with which is a part of the HEI cluster. The third flexibility is where the student can take it up in a open and distance learning or an online mode. That is the third flexibility. Now coming to the flexibility of the duration. Now we have said and the flexibility of exiting and rejoining. We have said that a student in the current scenario, when leaving a course at the end of first year or second year, is treated as a dropout or a failure. When we say lifelong learning, we need to accept that there may be many circumstances by which a student may leave a course in between, maybe personal, maybe the reason to take up a job, maybe any other reason, but allow that freedom to the student to exit with an option to rejoin or re-enter after a gap. As per the guidelines that have been brought out by the University Grants Commission for the ABC, this period of exiting and rejoining is a 7-year period. You cannot have it for infinity. You can't say that because knowledge itself is undergoing changes. And the motivation of a student after a very long gap to come back may also be a very remote possibility. So within a 7-year period, let us assume that from the coming academic year, not 2022, but 2023, the University Grants Commission or the UGC asks all higher education institutions in this country to start implementing the flexible 3-year, 4-year undergraduate program. And I join in 2023-24. I complete my first year. I complete my second year by the end of 2025 and decide to take a break. When I complete by taking a break in 2025, I get a window of 5 years by which I can come back and join the 3rd-year undergraduate program. That is the flexibility that is being allowed when we say multiple entry and exit option. Now, when exiting a program, we are not saying that the student is leaving without any certification. At the end of every year, the student completes at the undergraduate program. The student is entitled to a certification. At the end of first year, it is a certificate. At the end of the second year, it's a diploma. At the end of the 3rd year, it can be a complete bachelor's degree with maybe a specialization in one subject or so. A student has the flexibility to say that I don't want to do the 4-year bachelor's program. Now, such a student, when exiting at the end with a bachelor's degree, if wanting to go in for higher studies, will do a 2 years of master's program. A student who is doing the 4th year of bachelor's, and let us say the student is specializing in 2 major specializations or 1 major specialization and 1 minor specialization, and subsequently wants to do a master's program, a 4-year bachelor's degree student will need to do only a 1 year of master's program. Now, the third option that we have brought about in the 4-year bachelor's. Suppose a student in the 4th year of the bachelor's, which is your 7th and 8th semester, says that I am going to take up a research project and I will submit a dissertation. That is a student with bachelor's with research, not bachelor's with just honors. Bachelor's with honors is anything with a specialization, and that is not with a research. So a bachelor's with research student is a completely exempted from doing the master's program and can join a PhD program directly. Now that is the flexible 3 or 4-year undergraduate program, which means that this new structure of the undergraduate program and the resultant changes in the PG education and the doctoral programs, once it is announced by the UGC at a national level, we all institutions will have to start flowing in line with that, because UGC is the one which is funding all the colleges under 2F or 12B. And therefore, we all as higher education institutions should start thinking and preparing for it, since anyway it is not coming in 2022. It is likely it might come in 2023 or so. UGC is bringing out all its guidelines, the National Higher Education Qualification Framework, the Academic Bank of Credit, the multidisciplinary 3-year, 4-year program, the multiple entry and exit program. All these guidelines are already available on the UGC's website. Just for clarity, because I don't usually make a presentation, I will share the links or share the titles of these guidelines so that you all can have a look at these guidelines and understand the nuances of this implementation of these guidelines as have been brought out by the University Grants Commission. Now, I'll take up questions on this a little later, but let me continue with this whole idea of putting it in summarizing also for you. Whenever we announce it, we will allow students to take up courses not offered by the host institution, but offered by other institutions, part of HEI cluster. We will also allow students to take about 40 credits of the courses through MOOCs or ODL. The student is free to exit at the end of every year, but all undergraduate programs have mandatorily got an internship project, which is compulsory for undergraduate programs. Now, the additional part of it is, if a student when joining says that I will do first year and take a break, then such a student will have to do an internship in the first year itself. No student will be getting a certification of a certificate or a diploma or even a bachelor's unless he or she has completed an internship project. And if it is a technical course, then it will be an apprenticeship that the student will have to do. Now, all the courses that we are going to offer in the guidelines that we have given for the 3-year, 4-year undergraduate program, we have identified certain common courses. And within these common courses, we are talking of languages, we are talking of environmental science, we are talking of climate change, we are talking of giving 21st century skills of collaborative learning, research skills, because we would like research to be embedded with teaching in the undergraduate program. The reason why we do not feature in the global rankings is because we delinked research and teaching, whereas at undergraduate level itself, we would like to sort of empower our students with the right kind of research skills. ICT skills, that is digital skills that they need, communication skills to make presentations. All these are part of the common courses. And we would like within the disciplines also that we are teaching, whether it is any subject for that matter, that the faculty is attuned to the new curricular approach of embedding what we call the collaborative skills, the problem solving skills, the critical thinking skills, therefore using gaming techniques, project-based activities, in allowing the students to be actively engaged with the curricula rather than focusing on rote-based learning or memorization without understanding the concepts and without understanding the discipline or the domain knowledge itself. So the guidelines of UGC are very, very, micro level detailing that has been provided, and broad frameworks which will also establish the equivalence is being brought out by what we call the National Higher Education Qualifications Framework, which also takes into account the National Skill Qualifications Framework, because skill-based subjects, or what we currently call as even the BWalk programs, these will also become multidisciplinary programs. Now, this is the major shift that is there in undergraduate education and flowing into the postgraduate education and the duration of the PG along with the UG, and so also the doctoral programs. Now, the structure of higher education, I'll just broadly try and put that in perspective. When we say that we have the highest higher education system in the world, largest higher education system, we are actually having a complexity in the nature of our HEIs. Now, that's because the funding is different, the governance is different, the functionality of it is different, and so on. Largely, they are teaching universities, very less focus on research. So we have merely said in this policy that let us define institutions or categorize, firstly, that all higher education institutions should be called either a university or an HEI, not by different nomenclatures that we have that is applicable even for IITs, NITs, then ICERs, and so on. That can be in bracket as a brand name that they have, but otherwise they should be an HEI or they should be a university. Now, we would like to see a rationalization of higher education institutions by 2030, wherein institutions will decide for themselves whether they would like to be a teaching intensive university, by which we mean that they are focusing largely on undergraduate teaching. And to some disciplines, or in some disciplines, they may like to focus on research. So their major function is teaching, undergraduate teaching. They may offer PG or PhD in a few disciplines. Or it is a research intensive university, largely offering PG, doctoral and postdoctoral studies in various disciplines, that is their core strength. And in some areas, they would like to offer even undergraduate teaching. So that is research intensive education. But the whole idea is that the function of higher education is threefold. World over, universities and institutions have three functions. Teaching, which is knowledge dissemination, which we undertake in a classroom situation. Research, which is knowledge generation or knowledge production, publishing research papers, developing research patents. These are the kind of, the research, the knowledge production part of functioning. And along with that, now we are talking of entrepreneurship and startups and incubation centers and innovation hubs and so on, which is all related to research because it is in collaboration with industry and therefore a part of the knowledge economy for knowledge production. And the third is the community connect or the community engagement. And what higher education is to enhance the quality of life of people living around us and addressing issues that affect them. Clean water, clean energy, addressing canal system, coastal area problems, environment problems. These are the socially connected areas that we are looking at. And we know it rudimentally only with the NCC or the NSS and so on, but we need to go much beyond that. But the third function is common to both the teaching intensive or the research intensive. You don't have institutions that come out with that third function. But largely the teaching and research should not be delinked. They should be seen as two sides of the same coin. This would help higher education institutions to understand the totality of knowledge dissemination and knowledge generation and production in one holistic, integrated manner, and give our students also the research skills that are essential, which I'll come to in a short while. Now, the third category on which a lot of concern, and also rightly pointed out by the Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor, is the affiliating system. Now, we are all products of an affiliation system, and we all understand at a time when India became independent, we could not have had access to higher education unless we had an affiliation system. But an affiliation system where a particular university, universities in Kerala do not have affiliation beyond 250 colleges or so. But there are universities in this country which have 800 colleges, some which have even up to 1,000 colleges. Now, where is any quality control or quality assurance? The only function that an affiliated college is doing is it is having a yearly calendar with examinations being conducted, and it is merely doling out a certificate of the affiliating university with no quality assurance or parameters in terms of the learning resources, in terms of the faculty requirement, in terms of the faculty-student ratios, in terms of the laboratory library usages, and many other parameters which will not come in any requirement of NAC grading at all. Is that the reason why many of our higher education students, we are calling them as unemployable or lacking the employability skills? Largely, the affiliating system has seemingly outlived the purpose it has. But while saying that, the caveat is the aspect of equity and the aspect of access. We have said that we would like to see the 40,000 affiliated colleges gradually moving to become degree granting autonomous colleges. And let me be very, very clear. It does not mean that by the end of 2030 or 2040, for this function, we have said 2035, let us hope 2040. By no means or by no yardstick are we saying that by 2040, we will have 40,000 degree granting colleges. Many of these colleges will have to come together, merging themselves to become what we call a consortium type of a university or a conglomerate type of a university, or many of them will merge with teaching universities to become what we call teaching intensive universities. And many others can continue to remain as constituent colleges, enjoying a fair degree of autonomy. And those which are catering to the requirements of equity, inclusion, and access in remote areas, in tribal areas, in difficult to access higher education, they will continue to remain as affiliated colleges, but the numbers would be very, very minimal. And the remaining who have having the potential will, over a period of 15 to 20 years, through mentorship, through handholding by the state government, through handholding by the host institution, achieve certain benchmarks and quality standards and parameters of accreditation to become, over a period of time, through graded autonomy, to become autonomous degree granting colleges. So let us say UGC's colleges with potential for excellence. These are colleges which can right away think in terms of thinking to become what we call autonomous degree granting colleges. Now, how will this transformation take place? The policy envisages an important function that HEIs will have to undertake. What is it? It is nothing but a strategic plan or a plan of action. We have called that as an institutional development plan, IDP. The guidelines for developing an IDP in its draft form is already there on the UGC's website. Currently, I am preparing a document which is also supposed to be helping institutions how to frame a workable, viable, possibly pragmatic IDP. An IDP is a vision plan or a strategic plan of action where an individual institution makes its own internal autonomous decision of where it would like to see its own institution going forward in a 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, 20-year period of time. So let us start working out a route map or a kind of a action plan where we make a SWOT analysis, our own strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges or threats, to understand what are our core strengths, which are the new departments we can open, where can we collaborate with, what are the industry associations we can bring about in our institution collaboration, and moving forward, where we would like to see ourselves becoming either a teaching intensive university or a research intensive university or an autonomous degree granting college. These are the only three avenues that are open to the new paradigm that we are talking about. Now, the IDP is not going to be prepared by the government, or it is not going to be prepared by a bureaucrat. It is a document that has to be generated indigenously within each institution by the stakeholders, the teachers, the leadership, the management, the students, the parents, the local community, educationists in that area, the civil society coming together and creating this instrument, which will make for itself a sort of a way forward, looking at where you would like to see your institution going forward. Now, you all are part of a larger congregation of which you have sister institutions. It would be very viable for you all to think together, coming together as a congregation, what you would like to see, and each institution within in that congregation, where can it see itself going forward? The same is true for a university, whether it would like to see itself transforming and becoming more multidisciplinary. And we have also said that existing, nowhere in the policy we want green fields or new institutions. We already have a shortage of resources, and we do not want to start something afresh. All brownfields proposals of existing institutions metamorphosing themselves in a period of 15 to 20 years is seen as a larger picture, and we are thinking that we can also have MERUs or multidisciplinary education and research universities, which will combine the functions of teaching and research and become model universities, so to cater to a large number of students. Now, this structure is not going to in any manner be something that says that, you must have to become. It is something that is being individually decided by each institution. Now, let me come to the aspect of equity and the diversity with which we are living with. And our higher education, as rightly pointed out, there is imbalances, social imbalances, economic imbalances, regional imbalances, preparedness levels being different, and all these have to be addressed. And the policy has talked about equity and inclusion in two chapters, chapter 6 for school education and chapter 14 for higher education. And we have used an omnibus term of socially and economically disadvantaged group to cover the SCs, the STs, the OBCs, the religious and linguistic minorities, women, transgenders, urban poor, those with learning disabilities, both physical and other learning disabilities, physical disabilities and learning disabilities, those coming from geographically inaccessible areas, children of migrant labor, children born in vulnerable situations. That entire nomenclature for all of them taken together is socially and economically disadvantaged groups. And the policy has recommended setting up gender inclusion funds, social inclusion funds, setting up special education zones, allowing affiliation to continue in such areas where there is no access to higher education, and enhancing the scholarships and the freeships, making access devices available. And the most important change is that higher education, which is so long in the English language, and I am a person who believes that English language education is very critical. However, as a country which is having so much of linguistic pluralism, we should be able to promote, preserve, protect, and promote the development of our linguistic plurality. And if we have to reach a quantitative target of a GER of reaching 50% by 2035, which is the quantitative target, and rightly as pointed out, it is nowhere near what may be the global averages in higher education GER, we need to find out ways to allow more children to access higher education. One of the greatest deterrents of children not joining higher education is the medium of instruction. India is an agrarian country, a farmer's child, first generation learner, completes 12th standard, but is quite hesitant to join higher education because of the instruction being in English medium. Is there anything wrong in allowing higher education to be offered in regional languages? So keeping with this policy's principle of promoting multilingualism, which is a core strength of our country, we have encouraged multilingual education right from school education, and in higher education said we will offer higher education in regional languages. And AICTE is already offering, 8 states have come forward to offer engineering courses in regional languages. Other courses will also have to follow suit. This will break the barrier and allow many students who are not joining the portals of higher education to start accessing higher education. So if we want to make it inclusive, bilingual teaching, offering it in regional languages, if you're asking me where are the textbooks going to come from, we already have a lot of allocation being given by the 15th Finance Commission. A translation and interpretation mission is already there. We want higher education institutions to strengthen their language departments, provide faculty training so that we can start offering it in regional languages also. Now, the important aspect of this policy relating to students and faculty. As far as students are concerned, when we say that they can take multiple subjects and multiple courses relating to sports, to performing arts and so on, these are also what we call in our nomenclature extracurricular, and all higher education institutions should provide opportunities for debating, for environment clubs, for poetry competitions, for filmmaking, for dramatics, so many other areas, so that we call for the all-round development of an individual, not just, as we say, only learning, making Jack a dull boy. You should look at all dimensions of human activity and competencies and multiple competencies that we are blessed with. So someone is good at singing, someone is good at music, someone is good at dramatics, someone is good at a language, someone is good at, let us say, playing a sport. All this needs to be encouraged. And therefore, we want higher education institutions to strengthen and create what we call optimal learning environments. Simultaneously to this, we would like to promote their health and fitness by allowing them to have physical fitness and mental fitness. Now, mental fitness is a huge issue today, particularly since we have gone online and we are living in a world of gadgets where we think that entertainment is individualized to that mobile gadget that we are hooked to, and the social media platforms has resulted in a lot of individual isolation, resulting in stress, leading to student suicides and peer group pressures, forcing students to play games which are resulting in the loss of their precious lives. And therefore, in addition to career counseling and academic counseling and so on, we are talking of socio-emotional well-being of the student through psychological counseling. And at the school level, already we are saying counselors should be there. The same should follow suit in higher education. As far as the faculty is concerned, we have said that we need to create energized, motivated, and capable faculty by allowing them greater autonomy in the way that they can, exploit the curriculum and leverage the curriculum in a manner that attracts students to continue into their higher education in a very productive manner, creating what we call active learning environments. Over here, I am not having an option, but otherwise, as a faculty, what I would normally do in a session that I would take for a faculty workshop would be where I already share with them certain pointed questions which they can answer coming together as a group, making a poster, making any creative form by which they are depicting to me what they would feel as understanding of that particular discipline. By this exercise of giving projects or having what we call the flipped classroom techniques, you are actually engaging that student with that curriculum and with your disciplinary engagement. That helps the student to really understand what they are learning, and the disconnect that they have between the world of education and the world of work, which we have sought to bridge through internships and apprenticeships by giving them projects, is something that the teacher and the student work together and give them group activities and collaborative projects so that they learn through collaboration, develop their interpersonal skills, develop communication skills, how to make a presentation, so that finally when they graduate and go out into the world of work, they are able to present themselves for an interview and prepare themselves for the world of work. This is where the role of the faculty as an information giver is completely changed to becoming a facilitator, to becoming an enabler. Please understand, the student is born when the internet was already there. When they are familiar with the internet much more than you and me are, and we are not there as information dispensers. They can access information. You need to create knowledge in that student. You need to prepare the learners how to learning how to learn in an effective manner. So you're there as a motivator, as an enabler, as a facilitator, as a friend to engage them with that curriculum, which means you need to have innovative pedagogical styles. And obviously the assessments also will have to be in line with this new pedagogy, rather than testing their memory, giving them activities by which you actually test their ability to have understood the concepts and use them in real life projects and in real life situations. The NEP talks in terms of providing capacity building and continuous professional development for the faculty to their changed roles, and also a career progression track for them, leading them to even take up leadership positions through leadership development programs. But in keeping with the principle of accountability, the policy recommends a tenure track system with an extended probation of 5 years as a tenure to actually help the faculty to reach to a certain level of excellence, to be able to, achieve performance in the learners. Today in our higher education, the linkage between a teacher's performance and the learning outcomes of the student are not brought together. It's not seen as a cause and effect relation at all, unlike in school education. And while it is not fair to say that it can be a cause and effect factor also, at the same time, you cannot have a teacher of a higher education system, a faculty like me, teaching a subject and walking out of a class and not being bothered what that student is doing in life at all. Therefore, the linkage that a higher education faculty should have with the students in terms of enhancing their learning outcomes and in therefore actually performing well, not only in exams, but an understanding of that particular discipline is equally important. And that is where that accountability is being sought. But we have said that faculty can move up in a fast track incentivized mechanism to become academic leaders. And the policy is very, very clear that a faculty should not be sort of burdened with activities not related to their academics, but given them scope to enhance their academic capabilities, not only through the CPD programs, but also through giving them academic freedom for participation in seminars and so on, both at a national and at an international level. Now, the policy strengthens vocational education. It mainstreams vocational education. It promotes open and distance learning with quality assurance so that it is of high credibility and quality. It also talks in terms of promoting research by trying to embed research at the university undergraduate education, and also promoting interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary research through the idea of the NRF, which is already functioning in the office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Honorable Prime Minister. But NRF is no way attempting to centralize research. Existing research funding will continue the way it is currently continuing, but high-end research in cutting-edge technologies, in interdisciplinary areas, in Indian knowledge systems and many other areas for which there are no sources of funding will be taken up by the NRF. Now on technology in education, and this is the point where I would try to stop with, given the fact that I don't think I have the time to go into governance and so on, is the two chapters, chapter 23 and chapter 24 of the National Education Policy 2020. In fact, chapter 24 we wrote in the month of March 2020, after the COVID had already started raising its head, and the realization that we may have to move towards online digital education. Now, we all accept that technology needs to be leveraged for enhancing the quality of learning, where you can offer high quality education to quantitatively larger numbers at much reduced cost, because the investment in technology infrastructure is much lesser than brick and mortar investment. We also realize that technology can be used very effectively for educational administration, and many of our activities, when we use it through proper technology platforms, the ease of doing that work is much more enhanced. And the final aspect of technology is in the data management. And currently, I know all institutions have NAC asking for something, NIRF asking for something else, many other kind of assessment that you have asking for some other data. When you think of one data which can seamlessly meet different requirements, and you retrieve and pull out data only for the requirement that it has, it becomes much easier for managing the data at an individual institution level also. But on online education, in a country like ours, where, like the Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor mentioned, there are villages and regions which even today do not have electricity connection. Talking in terms of moving towards online education, and COVID precipitated that, it has brought into focus the fact that our preparedness at an individual student level, at an individual teacher level, at an institutional level, at a parental level, and at the governmental level was all brought out in focus with the COVID-19. We found out shortcuts to address those requirements, but we need to develop, and we are already at it, for develop standard operating procedures. These SOPs should be able to address multiple needs. A country like India cannot have one size fits all, because as we know, the connectivity is less, the lack of access to digital devices at an individual level is known as a huge digital divide. Given all these circumstances, coupled with the linguistic plurality that we have, calls for a kind of complete reconfiguration in the way we look at it. But it is emerging as a reality that the blended models of learning seem to be the way forward. How much of blending we do, depending on the availability of technology, the right mix will have to be worked out, not at a national level, but at an individual institutional level. So we need to create maybe 3 or 4 models and allow institutions, depending on their location, depending on their digital availability, both individual and institutional, and that access part of it. Now, the other part is the training of teachers. How to use that technology, because synchronous learning, to get the benefits of face-to-face learning, is something that most of us are not so very well prepared for. And therefore, the kind of workshops which allow us to leverage online technologies for a more enriched learning experience, with the synchronized learning that is happening, with student being able to ask a difficulty and a teacher being able to respond, or another student being able to intervene and start a conversation that is happening. These are the areas in which capacity building has to be done. Creating the digital infrastructure at an institutional level would require enormous efforts from the government and also the corporate sector. And this is where the industry partnerships will have to be focused upon, because in a country like ours, where public funding cannot go on in an infinite manner, and while we say that education is a not-for-profit activity and it is a public good, the reality is that we are still spending only something like 4.5% 6% of our GDP for entire education, school and higher taken together. And when we say only 4.3 or 4.6, it is all sources of funding, both government of India and state governments coming together. So to reach that 6% GDP is a long target ahead. And we should be able to leverage the corporate sector. Ultimately, where are our students going to? It is the human capital of the education system that is going and working in the workplaces in the corporate sector. And therefore, the corporate sector have a social responsibility, a corporate social responsibility to strengthen our higher education systems by having startups, by incubation centers, innovation hubs, and many other factors, including the technological gaps that we have and supporting for the technological infrastructure to address the digital divide, both at individual levels and at institutional levels. So online technology, like all of us understand, has got its merits and its demerits. But given the fact that even today, IT companies are continuing with a work from home scenario, and that the COVID pandemic is coming in waves and going in waves, and we are concerned about the health of the entire citizenry and the people that we have, it is possible that we might have to move in a very considered, pragmatic, slow-moving manner towards very workable, effective, blended models of learning. Now, on governance and on the regulatory system, we can take up questions if they come, but as a policy, we are also encouraging the preservation, protection, and development of our Indian languages and strengthening the language departments so that we can move towards not only understanding the wealth of this country in our different languages that we speak, but also contribute to the enrichment of those languages and allowing for higher education to be offered in regional languages. So the recommendations of the NEP 2020 in higher education is to provide for integration of disciplines, to provide for holistic learning and holistic development, allow students and teachers to function together in a more enabling ecosystem, which helps this country to move forward to become productive in all respects. Ultimately, the NEP 2020 is not using learner-centric in a cliche term. It is actually focusing or keeping the learner at the center of the fulcrum of the education system and trying to empower that student with the right kind of knowledge, skills, and capabilities required for surviving in the 21st century, which has the uniqueness of the dynamic changes that are happening and the reality that we do not know what the jobs of tomorrow look like. And therefore, a single discipline education might be a disaster for a student, unlike you and me, who could have been for 40 years in a same career. Even if we are teachers in that same career, we will have to continuously reinvent ourselves to new skills of how we can teach more effectively. Those students who are studying now may have to switch jobs at more dynamic paces into completely unknown fields, and therefore having exposure to multiple disciplines might be the key strength by which we make them empowered and employable in the coming years. Let me stop over here, and I thank the entire team of Catholicate College and others who have invited me for this webinar, and I'm open to taking any questions now. Thank you very much.